Good morning. I'm Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. The sun came out finally. Yay! So a couple of days ago, I live in Madison, so just about 8 minutes down the road from here. And the place where I take my dry cleaning is right in the center of town. And sometimes it's really hard to find parking there. And so I had driven around for the second time, and I saw somebody who was getting into their car, and I thought, oh, good, a parking spot, because I just need to drop some dry cleaning off. And as I approached the car, in my car, a fella got out of the car and gave me a timeout, like, no. I was like, oh, okay. And he came up and he said, Father. He thought I was a priest. Is there something I put off that says clergy? I don't know. I didn't have a collar on. No, I wasn't even in a tie. Maybe it's that earnest handshake. How are you doing? You know, I have to add that my female colleagues never seem to have that problem. One of the things that's very interesting about serving here in the fellowship, one of the most unusual things about serving this fellowship at this time, is that if you look at the professional staff on Sunday morning, the minister, Reverend Joel Miller, cisgendered guy, white guy, Michael Rosen, our music director, cisgendered white guy. There's Alex West back there, cisgendered white guy. Then there's and our director of religious education, Nick Walwork, a cisgendered white guy. There's probably not a single other UU congregation anywhere in the world that has that. Okay, there might be two, but it's very, very unusual. You would be most likely to see maybe an all-female staff or maybe one guy, cisgendered white guy, among a staff that's very diverse. I think it's just kind of the happenstance of how things worked out. I hope you take my word at that. That's what I think. But I've been thinking a lot about, it got me to thinking actually, along with some other questions I had. What does it mean to be a good man? What does it mean to help all of us who identify as men to become good men? I'm thinking a lot about that today. And so glad to welcome you as we celebrate life and all of the ways that we are human beings. Welcome. Harry Harris has our welcome and announcements now.
Good morning, everyone. And welcome to this wonderful, sunny but brisk day. It's great. We went, 11 days without sun, and here we are. So this is really nice. We're really grateful you're here with us this morning. I'm Harry Harris. I'm currently serving as the board treasurer, and I'm really pleased to be welcoming you this morning and making some announcements. First of all, welcome everybody online, or if you're watching later on video, and certainly here in the room, welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We are really pleased that you're here. We're a spiritual community that appreciates the importance of the practice of appreciation and tolerance. We look for ways to empower each other in our spiritual growth, supporting each other through journeys of birth, childhood, youth, adulthood, and when we become mentors to the younger generations. Being in Sunday worship together is a way that we learn who we are together and as individuals. This is a time when we practice listening. And in this time of worship, we are always learning to listen. But at the same time, we understand that if you need to have a conversation, you can take that elsewhere and allow others to listen in here while you have your conversation in our library or in some other space outside. On a bigger picture, if children, youth, and their families have questions about our religious education program, Joel has just mentioned Nick Walwork. He's our director of religious education, and our new season of religious education programming has begun, and Nick is pleased to talk with you about that and answer any of your questions about that. You can also find out more about our choir from our music director, Michael Rosen, who has also just been mentioned. And then, of course, we've also just mentioned our wonderful AV technical director, Alex West, who is pay no attention to the man behind the curtain in the back of us there. And certainly, we would be remiss if we didn't mention someone who's not here today, our congregational administrator, Katie Julick, who is just a wonderful resource and a wonderful person. And she's here most weekdays and is happy to get your emails and your calls or see you in person. And certainly, Reverend Joel Miller is our interim minister, and he's introduced himself that way. We have several announcements in our orders of service online and on paper, but some special announcements for today. Today, after the worship service, is the presentation of the Odyssey of Don Marks, a wonderful and fascinating man, and I hope that you will all try to see that, and if you can't stay today, you might be able to see it later online as well. But if you're staying here today, and I highly recommend you do, you can join us at noon in here in the meeting room, or watch that on YouTube from the ether. All of us who identify as men are warmly invited to join the Gathering of Men group here at the Fellowship. The Fellowship actually currently has 2 Gathering of Men groups. We refer to ourselves as GOM. Some say GOM. There's a little debate, long O, short O, but we'll get it figured out. We're currently meeting twice a month on Saturdays, and there might be, if enough interest, there might be options for other dates and times. But Gathering of Men supports us in developing close and continuing support in individual friendships among ourselves as men. In our meetings, we discuss feelings and issues of importance to us in a really safe, secure, and confidential space. And when it's helpful, we offer each other feedback and support in that as well. So if you're interested in being part of this friendly and insightful and engaging group, please contact Joe Erhane or Venkat Purunapanda or me or anybody else in here in the room who tells you they're part of GOM today, because they're all going to do that. Or you can also email Katie at the admin@muuf.org email. Thank you. Thanks.
I invite you to share in the this morning's affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship. Service is its law. This is our great covenant, to love together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you to stand if you wish.
For each
I'd like to tell a story now, and I'd like to invite children or youth to come up and join me, help me with the Time for All Ages this morning. Glad to see you guys. Thanks for coming up. Hi. Yeah, come on up. Bring it. Looks like you're bringing a tablet too. Thanks. And I like the heart. It's really lovely. So a long time ago, my children are all grown up now, and at least one of them might be having children of their own pretty soon. And I got to be the parent who was at home when they were little. I was an at-home dad. Now, 30 years ago, that was kind of an unusual thing to do. I don't know. Do any of you have a parent who is a man who stays home with you, like a dad? Or is it mostly your moms that are home with you, or do they share it? Sharing? Yeah, mostly shared. Yeah?
He teleworks on the computer so I can see him in the morning.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, on the computer, so you say hi, yeah. And your mom takes care of you while Dad works? Yeah. So when I was, my children were very small. Their mom went to work and I stayed home and I cooked and I cleaned and I took them to the park to play and get to know other kids. Sometimes I'd take them to the doctor. One day, we decided to go on a train trip. I wanted to see some friends. And so my daughter hadn't been born yet, but I took my son. And he was pretty little then. I mean, he was just barely walking. He kind of walked, I don't know. He was still learning to walk, so it was sometimes I'd follow him because I was afraid he might fall down because he was really still learning. And we got onto the train. And he wanted to walk up and down the aisle between the seats on the train. And the first person he walked up to, because most of the time he spent with someone else was with his dad. And he saw another man on the train, and he thought, oh, I wonder if he's like my dad. And he went up to the man and he held his arms up to say, pick me up and hold me. The man was wearing a tie. I was not wearing a tie back then, but he was wearing a tie, and he looked at my son like, ew. And then he looked at me like, please no. Okay. So I said, oh, let's go down this way. Let's go down the aisle on the train this way. And my son stopped by another person, a woman, and she looked at my son. He looked at her because he wasn't so sure about a woman he didn't know. And then he looked at me and smiled and put his arms up for me. And then the woman said to me, where's his mom? And I said, she's at work. I'm taking care of him at home. And she said, that's not good. You should be at work. His mom should be at home. I felt bad. I liked being at home with my kids. What was really interesting then was toward the end of the train ride, somebody had been watching us, and my son had started walking again on the aisle, and he went up to a woman, and this was a black woman sitting on the train. And when he went up to her, she smiled at him, and he smiled back, and then he put his arms up. Will you hold me? And she said, of course. She looked at me and said, okay. And I was like, yes. She picked him up and held him. He liked that. And she smiled at me. And she said, so you're at home with your son? And I said, yes. And she said, I just think that's wonderful. And I've remembered that for a long time because that felt really good. And I'm telling you that story because I wonder, are there times that people tell you how you're supposed to be, even though you don't feel like that's how you're supposed to be? You're nodding like, yeah, I've had that happen. Have all of you had that happen? Most of them are nodding like, yeah, that's happened to us. I wonder, after the service, if you might talk with the people who care for you, your friends, about the things that you like to be and the things you don't want to be, even though some people tell you you should be. That might be interesting to talk about with your families. Well, thank you for coming up and letting me tell that story. Appreciate it. As a people who journey together in spirit and in friendship, in modeling the work of community and the joys of community, it's important that we model the practice of it in these times of milestones, passages, and gratitudes. Tom McGinnis is here today. It's great to see you, Tom. He's doing well and getting back to his routine at Victoria Muse Assisted Living in Boonton. And this morning I also have brought not the actual men's group of men candle. I got the one that lives in the minister's office. And I wanted to light a candle. It's a lucky congregation that has 2 groups of men that meet regularly. It's important ministry. And there are many other passages that we are experiencing, joys and sorrows that we bring. We may wish to just be together in the silence of those experiences, or we may wish to share them perhaps more privately with perhaps members that we know and care about, perhaps at coffee hour or later. But this is a time when we remember how we are and why. I invite you into a spirit of meditation or contemplation or prayer. Spirit of life, we believe in and work for a people yet to be, a people yet to live. And as we aspire to what could be, we remember the voiceless. We remember the complications of technology, which give too much voice sometimes. We remember the innocent. We remember the vulnerable, the least powerful among us, those most in need of our protection. For the world we dream of, we remember those who depend on adults to make their world safe, to create networks of care and learning, the spiritual community, the schools around us, the doctors and teachers and counselors that support them as they grow, that supported us as we grew. We offer our thoughts, our prayers for those who do not understand partisan politics, who cannot yet vote, who have no idea what to do with debating points, but have a very deep interest in clean air, safe water, a world without war. We aspire to be those adults who exercise wisdom, act responsibly. We aspire to be those who care for others, that they may have a roof overhead, a warm blanket, a good pair of shoes, and enough to eat. And we know that as we try to keep each other safe, there are those who may be bullied at school, or maybe may themselves be bullied people tormented by demons we don't yet understand. Let us remember all that is tender and playful in ourselves, and of our own capacity for laughter and love as we build a world that is safe and beautiful. And may the promise of generations to come look back with gratitude on us as ancestors who came before. And now we set our minds to our prayers for our role as guardians and advocates of all people everywhere, children and the people yet to come, with that essential understanding that we are all children of God, or all beloved and worthy of our lives. Amen. So be it. Blessed be. Oh, Amazing Grace. I invite you to sing with me now.
Please stand if you'd like.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see.
This reading I offer this morning is by Mary Oliver. I confess, one of my favorite poets. This is entitled Sunrise. You can die for it, an idea, or the world. And people have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe, and I thought how the sun blazes for everyone so joyfully as it rises. Our offering this morning is split 50-50 with the Unitarian Universalist Association Side With Love 30 Days of Love campaign. There's instructions on how you can give online, or you can contribute via the basket. Folks online have your instructions in your online order of service.
What Joel had mentioned at the beginning of the service, and we talked, and he had asked if I could say something before the offering. I'll talk about the piece, but I wish I could see that woman that talked to you with the kids. 'Cause my wife and I are both cisgender, but she has the regular day job. I do all the cooking, when dinner and breakfast are on the table during the week. I'm at home, and I'm a stay-at-home house dad in that way. But I teach a lot of adults piano and children piano, and them or their parents always say, when they were growing up, there was one type of piano teacher. It was the old lady that hit you with the ruler. Male, previously female-dominated, totally female-dominated business as a piano teacher, and after school hours, and then of course working on Sundays. So, yeah, it's tough to, if someone had, when describing what it is to be a man or be manly, that word, and it's, I think of all the obvious things, but those just mean being a good person, but what does it mean to be a good man today is sort of an interesting question that I'll admit I'd be afraid to answer. And so when Joel and I were planning this service, this is sad is a strong word, but it's a very poignant topic. And most of our Sunday services, they're celebrations when we meet on Sunday morning. So today felt more like reflective and needed to sort of, as much as we've done and as far as we've come, our intelligent species, humans, there's so many things we still need to work on, or when pendulums swing in the other direction, it ends up being worse for us, and the world just continues spinning around us and nature continues to move on around us. So that this anthem sort of talks about that. It's a very, very sobering wake-up call. I'll read the text real quick by the composer, who's Cynthia Gray, a female composer, and she wrote the text. Gently falling rain, falling from the sky, streaming down like teardrops, teardrops from on high. Clouds, oh, won't you tell us what those tears are for? Do you weep for something we've ignored? Could it be that from your lofty post so high above, you have seen how little we have given of our love? Do you see the lonely, weary, troubled, and the poor? Have you seen the fighting and the war? Clouds, there must be some way to make your crying cease. Share with us the secret of happiness and peace. Do you mean to say that each of us can play a part? With each spark of love we light a flame of love may start. Reaching all around us, giving hope to those we know. This, you say, can help true peace to grow. Clouds, though you are parting, your point you've made quite clear. Peace will never happen unless we start it here.
So Caitlin Moran is a feminist writer. I picked her book up here about a month ago. She writes in this book, What About Men?, that she is often invited to speak to different groups about her books. Her audience is almost always feminist women. Most of her readers are also feminist women, not so many men. For many years when she spoke, her audiences of women asked questions about women's issues, and that's what they would talk about. And Caitlin Moran writes about feminism. She does it in an amusing and snarky way. She only gets a little mean sometimes, but it can be pretty funny. Then one day, it was about 4 years ago, there was time for one last question as she was speaking, and a woman said, "You know, there's loads of advice on raising girls, but I have a son, too. Do you, asked the woman, have any advice on raising good and happy men?" Now, Caitlin Moran had never really thought about it. First of all, she has only daughters, so she quickly made a joke about finding some men. Are there any men here to answer that question? There were none. And then the talk ended. But the question reappeared at the next talk, and the talk after that. And several times, the question a woman would ask would be, what about men? So she had the title of a book that she said she thought she might have to write. So she first wanted to see what men were writing about men, and she found big sections with books by women for women on women's issues. And she also found that bookstores do not have sections on men's issues. Now, 25 years ago, my sassy church mothers, the people who I so adored as a kid and as a teen, strong feminist women, they would have said, "Well, Joel, that's because the rest of the bookstore is the men's section." I would laugh if I heard that. Well, I wrote it down. I thought it was kind of funny to write it, to be honest. I'm proud to be a feminist man. But you know, truth be told, 25 years ago, bookstores actually would have usually maybe a shelf, usually more like a half shelf, of books on men's issues, because there was men's literature 25, 30 years ago. How many of you remember Iron John? Yep. Oh, good. At least half a dozen people. I read that book twice. However, so few men buy or even read books, and even fewer read books about men's problems, so bookstores no longer have that half a shelf on men's issues they used to have. And the women who were asking Caitlin Moran were serious when they said, "So what about men?" Many of them struggling with their boys or their children who had grown to young men. So I'd heard about Caitlin Moran's book, and I went to the Barnes & Noble not far from here to buy it. The clerks looked up, hadn't heard of it. She looked up and saw it was in the database, but she was like, "I don't know where this book is. I'll go look for it for you." Thank you. 15 minutes later, she came with the book. She had found it on the cart outside by the front door, hoping somebody would walk off with it. She sold it to me for 75% off. Such is the state of books about men these days. It just came out 5 months ago. I'm worried about men myself, and so is Caitlin Moran. One of the things that I notice is that queer men, non-binary people, and women in general are pretty good at self-care. But as a group, cisgendered straight men are terrible at taking care of themselves. The youngest men these days may be getting better at it. But I think of the men who I adored as I was growing up in the Unitarian Universalist church that was so important to me. And a lot of them simply would not go to the doctor until their partner, their wife, most usually, would badger them enough that they'd say, all right, I'll go to the doctor. And then they'd turn out needing heart surgery or some major thing. Never mind about reading a book, how to make their lives better. Some of them did, though. But I'm still worried about men. It's even a global issue. Men are not doing so well. I noticed it. I first really kind of noticed it where I got worried about, wait a minute, what's happening with boys? What's happening with men? My children were applying to college a little over 10 years ago. And I was really struck, the ratio of women to men in colleges, not just in the United States, but globally, is 60-40, or was 60-40 if you just measured it in a binary sort of way. As colleges, some colleges, certainly in the United States, also now are tracking people who identify as non-binary or transgender. That is as much as 5% of a college, the student bodies of colleges and universities. So, it's about 57.5 to 37.5 people who identify as men, people who identify as women. And then after college, or after high school, if a young man chooses not to go to college, but go into work or develop a skill in a trade, it's not been great. 30 years ago, men between the ages of 25 and 55, 97% of them were in the workforce in some way or another. That number has fallen so that the number of men who've given up on finding jobs, who simply feel they can't find a job or participate in the workforce, has tripled, more than tripled. It's close to quadrupling, especially in rural areas. I served in a congregation in a rural area of northern New York, and the statistics on suicide rates for men, especially in rural areas, are breathtaking and tragic to me. In general, in the United States, suicide rates for men are 4 times higher than for women, approaching the suicide rates for lesbian, gay, bisexual, young adults, and even on their way to approaching the suicide rates for transgender and non-binary people, who clearly have much to struggle with in terms of expectations of the world around them. And since I have raised the topic, if you know someone considering suicide, I'm very happy to talk with you anytime. You can call the church, find my number, we'll find a time to talk. I hadn't thought to do a service, though, on men until I recently read 2 articles. One, that the marriage rate and birth rate for young heterosexual men and women has dropped significantly, even beyond the sharp declines of the last 10 years. And one study found that the reason for some of this decline is that young men and young women are starting to diverge in their political differences. Young women trend more politically liberal, especially after the Supreme Court ruling, where it's obvious the Supreme Court plans to make all abortions illegal one way or another. Young men, however, are trending politically right-wing. It's a problem, I think, for our democracy. And as it turns out, it's a problem for dating, because a lot of women don't want to date a guy who thinks she should be forced to finish a pregnancy or forced to continue a pregnancy that may even kill her. I'm not sure I'd want to date a guy like that either. A couple of times in the past years, as I've seen articles like this and I've gotten worried, I've tried to bring up my worries with women I trust and respect, women in my family and colleagues. I, for a long time, got sharply worded rebukes. So come on, Joel. Men have been hurting and exploiting women for thousands of years. We have a couple of years where things have changed. Women are starting to do better. We'll move past this. But I've struggled with that response. It's frustrating to me. How do I encourage the people I serve to care about those children who are going to become men, those men who are struggling? And why does caring about some people have to translate in not caring about the very real struggles of other people? Let me put it more bluntly. Because I'm concerned about how boys become men, I don't think that has to mean that I don't care about the well-being of women. I care very much about women's well-being. I care very much about the complex ways that our human experiences can add to the struggles that we may have or the suffering we experience. I mean, it's been tens of thousands of years that women have suffered unreasonably at the hands of men. I'm worried these days for women. Just after all, I now live in a country where half the people, not quite half the people, voted for a president who is a proudly self-confessed rapist, and they might vote for him again. We need a global Me Too conversation, clearly. And I care very much about the well-being of those of us who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, or not the standard way you're supposed to be human. You're supposed to be this kind of man or this kind of woman, and you can't be anything else. I don't want anything to do with that. I care about the well-being of people as they find out who they are, with all of the fascinating backgrounds they come from. I care about the well-being of those of us who are black people, or those of us who might be indigenous people, maybe some of us who are Lenape and still living on our ancestral lands here in New Jersey. There are people among us who are Hispanic or Asian or Jewish or Arab. We all experience violence, suffering, because of the selfishness and cruelty of others. Some of the advice I got from Nick as I was thinking about this service, he said, be careful not to make it into an oppression Olympics, Joel. You don't want to say, men have got it worse than women. No, women have got it worse than men. Wait a minute, no. Some people of one race got it worse than another race. And it reminds me of theological school when I learned early on, suffering's not a competition. Suffering is suffering. We each experience it in our own ways, our own unique journeys. And if we really believe we're living in an interconnected web of existence, then we have to look out for the well-being of everyone. Now, I found that particular statement hard to write. I mentioned Donald Trump, who I have a visceral dislike for. I have a visceral dislike also for tyrants like Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin. And guys like that, they know who they are. They're not embarrassed or ashamed that they cause great harm to others. If we're going to worry about who the patriarchs are and who maybe we ought not worry so much about, let it be the patriarchs like them. And should I have even said that? It's hard to be a universalist. It really is. But that's the weird thing about patriarchy. It tells us, be this way. Yes, you can hate some people. Yes, you should judge your value as a human being by how much money you make, or how beautiful you are, or how big your muscles are. Don't be vulnerable. It's interesting, as I was reading about this, one guy who makes movies was talking about if he's, the producer is making a movie that's about women. All the women are starving themselves to death so that they can be as thin and svelte as they can be before they begin filming itself. And for the men, he says it's totally worse because basically they're going to be doing a superhero film, so they've got to eat 4 times a day, huge amounts of protein, and then they've got to work out right afterward and bulk up and get muscles bigger than a trash can. And they're all on steroids, even though they're not supposed to be, so they're really grumpy. But in the movie, they've also got to figure out how to cry and look sensitive. He hates making those movies. Finally, I said, I am going to preach on this because I saw an article. It was talking about a young comedian who was becoming very unhappy with the relationships she was having with men. And she was so frustrated, she declared herself to be, quote unquote, boy sober. She didn't want to say celibate, because for her that had negative connotations about women's sexuality. And I guess as a minister I want to say, so you decided to put the negative connotations on the guys you want to go out with? I'm not so sure why they're going to want to go out with you if male sexuality is something you've got to get sober from. More to the point, I really struggle. And this is what I'm thinking about for us. When I see a little feminist girl in a t-shirt that says girls rule, I like it that girls, we're teaching them to feel empowered. Good. I still want us to have a woman as president of the United States, preferably one who is a feminist. But I have to wonder, why is it okay for a shirt that says girls rule when I'm quite certain that if a feminist boy wore a t-shirt that said boys rule, his parents might be stripped of their feminist credentials. They might be seen as tools of the patriarchy. I so appreciate sex-positive imagery and women's, sex-positive imagery for women's and women's bodies and sexuality in music and art. Several churches I've served, congregations I've served, have proudly sponsored in the past something called the Vagina Monologues, about how women find healing from sexual violence and celebration of their sexuality. I'm probably not going to get in trouble this morning for saying vagina. I'm not going to say the corresponding word for males from the pulpit, because when I get in a lot of trouble for that. And what kind of message is that for a boy this morning? What are we telling them about their bodies and their lives? I've been really curious about Travis Kelce, the boyfriend of Taylor Swift, celebrity football player. He looks like he has to live in this thing called a man box. There's some men's groups, they talk about the man box that patriarchy wants you to live in. It's a horrible place to be. I failed the man box early on in life, so I never even tried to be in it. But then I imagine Taylor Swift, she's pretty cool, and she's very savvy. And would Taylor Swift date a guy who only lived in the man box? I kind of doubt it. I know that it's possible to be a guy who loves football and who is a feminist and who is called to nurture people's spiritual lives. I work with a guy like that every day. That would be Nick. I think Travis might be like that. So this is a picture of a group of men here in the fellowship. John Solu brought it up. He thought Harry might share it, and I said, I want to talk about this in the sermon, because I want to talk about what groups of men can do. There's a group of men here, all kinds of ages, life experiences. And when I started going to a men's group years ago, I was actually in theological school. And one of the things that we had to do early on was figure out how to fully be the emotional beings that human beings are. And for some of us guys, Well, I should let you know that the two groups, the women's group of theological students, UU theological students, and the men's UU group of theological students, we would meet at the same time, the men in the basement and the women on the opposite side of the building on the first floor. And it was good that we did that because sometimes the men really needed to emote after having not learned to emote for a long time, because if you're in the man box, you're not allowed to cry, you're allowed to get mad. You're allowed to be greedy, I think, and that's kind of about the limit of how you're supposed to feel. I don't know. I didn't spend any time in the man box. I don't quite understand it. But one of the things I know is that when we were in men's groups, sometimes we would just kind of have to let it out. And there was some really loud moments in the men's group. One day, some of the women came down and peeked around the corner. Are you guys okay? Yeah, we're doing fine. What was the screaming? We're just emoting. You're not planning anything nefarious here, are you? No. We're just planning how to love ourselves and each other better as guys and be good friends. Men's group became so important to me at that time in my life that when it came to my first child was born, my son was born, it was my men's group that performed the dedication of my child and me and my partner, his mom, as parents. It was a very meaningful experience for me. And later the women's group came in to share with the experience with his mom. I commend to you the group of men that meets here, either of the groups. I've had the privilege to meet with them and the privilege to see how loving and kind they are to each other and how much they encourage each other to be the men that they are, however that is for each individual man, to be good men, to be loving men, to be men who are free. That's the gift of Unitarian Universalism, especially men as Unitarian Universalists. Love one another. Remember the importance of the support for each of our journeys, wherever it may take us, as women, as men, as non-binary people, transgender people, as people of many different beliefs, many different walks of life. It's hard work. It's precious work. The world needs you to keep doing this work. And forgive me for saying it, but how many men will find themselves and find the way of being loving, good men, not just in that building, but in the people yet to come and fill that building and fill your hearts. I'm glad you're here.
Please stand if you'd like. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every dream and time, and we see in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our stories from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, and our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace.
Go now into this beautiful world, into the beautiful people in it, and help them find their joy and their love and their ability to make the world a better place. You bring much beautiful light to the world. Go in peace. Be in peace. Thank you.
mobile enough. That's true. The generation, I've got no excuses, and I didn't know. It's very easy. I grew up with easy versions.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, I got the blue and lavender memo.
Yes.
That's gorgeous.
But see, and I didn't buy them from the same store
But
at the same time.
Wow, that's amazing. What time would you like me here next week?
9:45 works. If you want to come.
9:45.
Yeah,
Okay.
9:40, 9:45.
Okay.
If that works for you, that's good.
That's
Yeah,
good.
we'll do it, right around then, and then we'll go through it as is, and
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And I'll pick songs around it that'll match. So yeah.
I'm sorry?
I'll pick the congregational songs.
Oh, right,
We have a
yeah.
winter chant in there, things that
Yeah.
work. It certainly is.
Who's
Go-
speaking?
It's a good question. I'm not sure we were talking, we worked up till here, the 4th, and then we have some dates in the future, but we haven't talked about the 11th or 18th. Yeah.
Well, the 18th is a Layla.
Well, that's right, sorry, that's what I meant. 18th, I think is that.
But-
25th, I know.
But it's kind of like just in time inventory, I guess.
Well, what's nice about it is that, either way, we'll still do the similar song and it'll fit. And like I said, I don't know if I was going to be working for that day. But it didn't come up in the same advocacy meeting, so I didn't get to confirm. I think he's not sorry about that.
You can get to him soon.
Yeah.
Get to him today.
Yeah. I just.